Today we're going to go through testing in FinPower Connect, using the different modes, testing licenses, and how to deal with error messages. We will start with an overview of the modes themselves. There are 3 different modes in FinPower Connect available for use, depending on what the user is needing to do. These are Global Test Mode, Normal Test Mode, and Production Mode. Global Test Mode, also known as Forced Test Mode, forces all users into this mode. To turn this on, you go to Global Settings, Cost Centers to the General page, and you select the option Forced Test Mode for all users and services. Once you click Apply, you will receive a warning that tells you that you must restart or reopen your database. All users should log off and on again for the changes to take effect. A few points of note with Global Test Mode are that the words Test Mode Enforced appear in the title bar. The background colour is changed to a bright green, as you can see, and this cannot be overridden in user preferences or global settings. This is to really immediately alert the user that they are in fact in Forced Test Mode. In Global Test Mode, no emails or SMSs can be sent. This includes things like the email button on reports, button strips, account actions, and on error messages. It was designed this way to ensure that no accidental messages are sent while testing in a live database or a copy that contains real client or staff information. You should still receive warnings or errors relating to these, provided you don't have this option ticked. Ignore errors applies to messaging services. When we have a look at this here, we can see that we've had the message pop up, report successfully emailed, and that is because the ignore errors is ticked. This feature was built in to give the flexibility to suppress the warnings which may be desirable in certain testing scenarios. For example, sending an email. You may wish to still simulate like the email has gone so that a log is created and you can preview exactly what the email would look like. This is good for checking your HTML formatting, email signatures, and your smart tags, etc. that may be resolved. Another thing to be aware of is that if you have an image set under Global Settings, User Interface, or under User Preferences, that is so large it fills up the entire background space, you will not see this bright green colour, as shown in this image here. This is just something to be aware of, especially if you're relying on seeing this change. Normal Test Mode, or just Test Mode, is a user-based setting and has different behaviours to the Global Test Mode. Firstly, as previously mentioned, this can be set per user locally and doesn't affect other users in the database, provided the global setting is set to allow production mode based upon user preferences. We get our warning again. The user can then go to their own user preferences, Cost Centers General page, and select Test Mode under the Use Test or Production Mode for Service Requests option. This mode will ensure that any calls to third-party services are sent to their respective sandbox environments where they exist, and use the credentials set on the Test Credentials page on the Cost Center where relevant. In Normal Test Mode, emails and SMSs are allowed. There is no bright colour warning, and there is nothing in the title bar to indicate that you're in test mode. This is changing in version 3.4.4 so that it is clearer. There are, however, ways you can tell that you are in test mode easily. For example, if you go to run a credit inquiry while in test mode, you'll see in the wizard header here, in brackets, test mode very clearly. This is indicating to you where the request is going to be sent and again which credentials are going to be used. Production mode, the final mode. This is the mode most users will be in for their day-to-day functions. This sends live calls to services, so proceed with caution. This is again not displayed in the title bar, but the absence of test mode in the header is an indicator. For example, in the credit inquiry wizard, there will be no brackets. Testing tips. We thought we'd go over some handy tips and tricks for testing and diagnostics when things aren't working as expected. Often the quickest way to determine if something is not working because of an unexpected feature, as we like to call them, or bug versus a configuration issue, or an issue with a custom script, is to test the scenario in your own separate test database, with and without the script or inbuilt settings, to see differences in behavior. A good example of this is working out the behavior of a myriad of different account type settings. You can duplicate the account type easily, recode it, and then change the applicable option you're interested in seeing the behavior of. Then all you need to do is set up two different accounts with the same amount, interest rate, term, etc., using your two different account types, running the account processes ahead and comparing the differences. Typically, it's common practice to take a copy of the demo database supplied with FinPower Connect. You can find a copy of this in your Intersoft installation folder. This has many things pre-configured to a level where it's not usually too time-consuming to tweak and to set it up as a go-to test database for future use. The evaluation license, however, should be replaced with a testing license. These are for your own use and never to be sent to clients. Clients will always test in their own UAT environment with their designated license file supplied by Intersoft systems. FinPower Australia testing licenses should have a CSN of 9810, whereas Intersoft's are 999. A variety of license options are available depending on what module combinations you require for your testing. You'll know from our session last week just which menu to go to import said license. Just a refresher here, these are all the different modules available, and depending on what your client requires, there will be many different combinations, which changes how the interface looks, works, operates, etc. Importing a license is really easy. You just select the import license from a file option, find your file, and then click finish. You'll then need to have your own test credentials set up on the cost center. In the test credentials area, and you can import your custom scripts to test too, provided it's feasible to do so. Sometimes, of course, the customization is so custom and has a lot of dependencies that it's easier to test this in a copy of the database it was intended for. This is where global test mode is particularly handy to prevent any accidental emails or SMSs. You should, however, always check the following things before testing in any database. 1. That you're in test mode if you need to be, and which test mode is appropriate. Number 2, that no live credentials for a client's production environment are stored in that database in the cost center on the credentials tab, or in global settings or user preferences. This includes any SMTP or messaging details. and GL credentials for those integrations as well. Number 3, that the client's customers' details, have been scrubbed and replaced with 9999 or similar. We have a scrub script that can go through the database and do this for you for a number of fields to protect the privacy of your client's customers, including bank accounts, contact addresses, etc. This safeguards against accidental contacts and privacy breaches. This image here shows the parameters available to be updated or cleared. You can email application support at any time for more information, and we'd be happy to supply this to you and send instructions. You can actually put any number in here, so you could put your own mobile number in if you needed to send a text message. Just be very cautious when running the published documents wizard with live text credentials in a database, as you may end up sending yourself 75 text messages, speaking from experience. Another good thing about the scrub script to note is that you can actually select a client ID or a range in here to only update the one client or specific range. And that can be really handy depending on what testing you're doing or the size of your database, if you're able to isolate your testing to that one client. If you need to test email or SMS functionality as part of a workflow or any other process, ensure that mobile number, as I've just mentioned, or email address is set to your own or an applicable company number or address. Testing using third-party interfaces. There are a few tips and tricks associated with our integrations with third parties, like click send, secured signing, etc., that I would like to mention as things to look for when planning your testing. Number 1, not all services have a test mode or a sandbox environment. If we take MotorWeb here, for example, in New Zealand, we can see on the Test Credentials tab, there is a notification saying that MotorWeb does not support a test environment. Some requests will return a mocked response to assist with your testing. We have started putting notes like these on the cost centres as services are updated so that it's clearer as to which service does what. What this mocked response actually means is that when you run a MotorWeb inquiry in test mode, you'll receive a dummy report. The information returned here has the same vehicle information every time. This isn't a bug, it's just a mocked response to show you what the report's going to look like. You'll also notice that in this case the current owner is Intersoft Motor Dealer Limited, which is another handy giveaway. There are others with mocked responses. Again, these are usually noted on the cost centre, like shown here for text stream with advanced messaging. We have the option here to return mocked responses for requests where available. If the service doesn't have test mode or mocked responses, there simply won't be a test credentials tab, like here on the Adobe Sign page in the cost centre form. We've only got the one tab down the bottom. Another important thing to note is that often the URLs for the requests are very different for production versus testing. You should only ever change the request URL if you've been expressly told to do so by the service. You can see here in the paste hint what the defaults have been set as by development, which has come from the integration guides right from the inception of coding by development. If there's a change to these, development is usually aware, having received an update from the third party, and a job that is raised in the system to make the change. Normally, existing integrations and connections are not affected. Moving on to understanding error messages. Unfortunately, error messages are a part of life, But what we're aiming to do here is to aid in decoding the mystery around error messages and what to do when you encounter one. The first point we'd really like to reiterate is that not all error messages mean that there is something wrong with FinPair Connect. Certainly, what we'd like to call unexpected features do happen, but a lot of the time that error that occurs is down to configuration or sometimes user error. We've set up a few common scenarios and how applications port read and review these to determine the appropriate course of action. This first error appears mostly in test databases or early in a new year. Bear with me one moment. We've now run the account processes, and as you can see, we've come to the end, and in this case it said processing aborted, 10 consecutive accounts failed to process. Click OK to review the errors. So this one's nice and easy. It's telling us to click OK. Then we get a summary of the errors that caused the account processes to fail. This one is a very good example of our general rule of thumb here in app support, which is when we are reviewing an error, we start with the last line of the error first. In this case, the last line clearly states Entity M prevents transactions being dated after 31/12/2021. This suggests straight away to us that there is something about the entity that requires reviewing. When we review the entity settings, if I didn't already know that this was contained on the accounts page, we would normally click through each of the pages, looking out for the date that the error message had mentioned. As you'll see, as soon as we correct the issue for these account opening dates, we can rerun the account processes and all is well. Another example of a configuration issue is this one here. So running the income investment report, we get this error. Again, in the last line, we have some key information. The entity's phone number is defined on its main branch M. The first line here is also important, as it tells us why it's failed. But the second line is what's telling us where we need to go to review the configuration to remedy the issue. If we go into branch M and add a phone number, again, we've resolved our issue and the export was able to go out with no problem. Whilst these two things are relatively easy, all error messages for known or captured errors generally will give a good indication of where the issue is when you break it down. Trickier ones, like errors generated by an issue with an integration with a third party, for example, have a few tricks to them. For example, errors that are returned by a third party also hold some useful information. If we take this example here of a credit inquiry on this particular report check, we get the following error. Again, looking at the last line, we immediately have some good information. Subscriber is not authorized for this method error. This suggests an issue with the configuration of the credentials at the Centrix end. For example, not being licensed to access that type of report. Or sometimes it can indicate the wrong default options have been selected on the cost center and the user has not manually unticked them or realized they don't have access. Either way, we now have two areas we can review and rule out. The first thing I do with these errors is review the service log. To get to the service log, you go to the report menu, select Audit Search, and enter the details for the type of service log request you're looking for. Using as many range filters as possible, this will speed up the process when actually locating the log you're looking for. As we can see here, the service log does provide good additional information, including that this particular one was created whilst in test mode. When we drill down into the service log, we can see the failure reason from Centrix here, which is what was also in the error message we've already seen, but we can also now review the request and the response. First, looking at the response, we can see here there's a support data field. On this particular option, there's nothing here, but quite often there is. This one here is relatively straightforward because it's a report that doesn't have many options. So it's just failed straight on a reason subscriber is not authorized for this method. But if we have a look at this example here, this one here, in the support data field, we can see here it says Smart ID. This is a real client example with identifying information blanked out. We can see up here further that the initial credentials are okay, but that the inquiry has still failed. The issue was resolved in the end by unticking Smart ID in the cost center as a default, meaning that the user didn't have to manually untick this option as they progressed through the wizard. It was also confirmed by Centrix directly that they weren't licensed for Smart ID. Having a look at these areas can save a huge amount of time if you know where to look. Unfortunately, we can't go through every scenario today. However, if you do get an error message that is not making sense to you, you can always send the full stack trace and a copy of the service log through to application support for further review. To send the stack trace, all you need to do is click this email button here and it will pop open the email to send. You just need to enter our email address in here. Of course, this only applies to either production mode or test mode normal. Force test mode will not send the error message, so you just need to use this copy button here, which will copy the entire stack trace to your clipboard, which you can then manually paste in an email to send through. Getting the service log for us is also pretty simple. Once you've located your service log, all you need to do is click on the export button here, save it to a file, then attach it to an email for us. So we've come to the end of our session now. I hope you've learned something new. Next week, in the next video, one of our code team will go through debug modes and having a look at all the tips and tricks there to figure out why your script's not working, or other ways you can identify at a deeper level what may be going on. Thank you.